I'm just going to say it. Baldur's Gate 3 is bad. Okay, it's not really bad. It's fine. It's okay. There are some things to like about it, but I find most of those things are very moment to moment and in a way superficial, because it's like, oh, that was a funny line, or oh, hey, I get to do this hilarious thing, right? It's very moment to moment in the sense that what matters is this a cool thing that you can do? And it's actually the exact kind of DMing I rail against. Do not run your games this way. By all means, put funny or cool moments in, but if you put funny or cool moments in without thinking about the implications to the story or the gameplay or anything like that, you just undermine your player's ability to actually attach to those things and be invested in them. It's a very big deal. Now, there are different thresholds, right? This is the subjective part, is that there are different thresholds for this. Some people have a higher tolerance or a lower tolerance. I have a pretty low tolerance, so as soon as it happens once or twice, I'm like, okay, whatever, I don't care. And also, full disclosure, I have played the game plenty. I did a full playthrough on Tactician mode, solo, and I did playthrough with small bits of mods, just a couple mods, like I increased the level cap on the second playthrough, and then I increased the difficulty to try and compensate for the increased level cap. And I'm doing a multiplayer playthrough right now. By the way, enjoying the multiplayer stuff a lot more, but that has very little to do with the actual game itself, because the game doesn't have any multiplayer specific mechanics really, or systems. I wish it did, because I think multiplayer is where the game shines the most. But the point I want to make more than anything else is that you shouldn't DM your games like this, because if you focus on what's funny now and you don't think about the implications of all that, you have a problem where players can't invest, and over time that just compounds, and eventually you'll get to the point where no players can invest, right? It's a threshold. Different people have different thresholds, different sort of levels of tolerance, but as you keep going, it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse. And especially in a D&D game where you might be running for like, you know, years, eventually people just kind of check out, and it's not a good thing. You want to be very careful to avoid that for obvious reasons, I think. Let me give you a quick example of how this applies to gameplay. Not story, I'll do gameplay. I'll give a quick example about story too, but I'd rather focus mostly on the gameplay thing. So actually, I'll do the story first, because then I can focus on the gameplay. Okay, so with story, it's something like, if somebody says something out of character, just to make a joke, right? It doesn't even matter. I don't even need to figure out a specific example of that. You can just imagine how that might happen, right? Because my argument here is not so much that Baldur's Gate is a bad game, as much as it is, don't do these things that I think Baldur's Gate does. So even if you're like, oh, Baldur's Gate doesn't do any of those things, it does. It definitely does. But that's not the point. The point is, don't do these things, okay? If you have a character that says something out of character to make a joke or to say something poignant, that's a cost, right? There's a cost to engagement, a little one or a big one, depending on the person, but it is always a cost to engagement. Because now what you're doing is you're slowly teaching your audience, hey, don't worry so much about what people say. It doesn't really have any impact or relevance long-term or in any kind of like larger sense. That's what you're saying, right? If you say that once, people don't necessarily entirely believe you, and maybe you can recover from that fairly easily. But if you say it again, and then again, and then again, and then again, people start to believe you. They go, okay, well, I guess it doesn't matter then. It also has a gameplay impact. And this is the important one. And I want to make this point because it has a narrative impact also, but this is narrative, like story writing and character writing, and having a gameplay impact that is significant. And when we talk about gameplay, I'm talking about player decisions, right? The actual decisions you make as a player and what options you choose moving forward in the game. So in Baldur's Gate 3, this is my go-to example. There are two that I'm going to compare against one another. It's my go-to example because it's the most sort of clear-cut difference between how the game seems to expect you to interact with the dialogue. And I want to point out one that expects you to interact with the dialogue, because I think a lot of people think of D&D as being this ultimate example of the combination of gameplay and story. And while I don't think that's necessarily true, or that it necessarily has to be true, because people think of it that way, I think it's a good idea to take this like story gameplay combination thing and examine it. So basically, the example is when you talk to Volo versus when you talk to Vlaakith. And yeah, this is going to have some spoilers in it. I guess it's been about long enough. If you don't want the spoilers, then I'm going to do spoilers now. They're not huge. They're not like main story spoilers. Not that it's that interesting. I'm going to get... People are going to be mad about that. I'm not sorry. It's not interesting. Okay. Give me... If you hate that, if you hate me for saying that the Baldur's Gate story isn't good, leave a comment. Leave an angry comment below. Leave angry rage comments and up my traffic. Okay. So let your hate propel me to stardom. Okay, so when you talk to Volo, you can talk to him a few times. Eventually you can recruit him to your camp, and eventually he's like, all right, I'm going to perform surgery on you, and it's very bad. And then later there's a time when you're talking to Vlaakith. She's a big projection, and Vlaakith is a big, like I said, spoilers. Vlaakith is a big, like, super powerful lich lady. And if you're talking to Vlaakith, this is part of Lae'zel's quest. If you're talking to Vlaakith, you get to a point where you can talk to Vlaakith, and she tells you, like, oh, do this stuff for me, and it doesn't matter what. And you can just say no. But what happens is the dialogue is telling you, like, oh, Vlaakith wants you to do this. Well, Vlaakith is talking to you, but she's like, I wants you to do this. She wants you to do this, and she wants you to, bring the thing to her so that she can, whatever, exert great, because she's power, she just wants power. And the dialogue makes it pretty clear, actually, to its credit, that this is a very bad idea to say no to her, because she's very powerful and she's like vaguely threatening. The implication is that she's sort of threatening you. And so this is all from memory. I'll put the footage here maybe, and then you don't have to take my word for it. Right now I'm going from memory.
Hello, I was editing that video, and I was going to go get footage when I said that, and then I realized I don't have any save files in that area, and I don't want to take the footage from somebody else, and also I am not playing that game for like 15 or 20 hours or whatever to get to all those spots. You'll just have to take my word for it or go look it up. It's fine.
Okay, but she's like threatening you, and it's very scary, and the dialogue is implying, like, don't say no to her. That's a terrible idea. Now, what this is something that DMs sometimes do, and I generally recommend against it, although contextually you can do it. I'm not going to get into that right now, but this is something that some DMs like to do, where they use a character in a story to sort of convey information to the players, and that's not a good idea. Okay, so generally speaking, right? And what basically is happening in this moment is you can think of it as the DM saying, do not say no to Vlaakith. Do not say no to Vlaakith. Do not say no to Vlaakith. And there's like multiple of these, right? Multiple stages of the dialogue saying, like, don't say no. And then if you keep saying no, she just says, oh, then die. And she casts Wish and you get a game over. Okay, first of all, obviously it's not a real game of D&D, but if it was, imagine if the DM was trying to tell you through character dialogue and you just ignored that, and then the DM was just like, oh, everybody dies. TPK. Okay, obviously it's not that, because it has a save system, which also really undermines the D&D feeling, which is a separate thing, but it's annoying because it fundamentally means your decisions do not matter. If you can save every second, there are no consequences. And if there are no consequences to your decisions, D&D as a concept really kind of falls apart. But that's a separate thing. An important thing, but a separate thing. Right, but basically what it's saying is you can just save. And by the way, as a second side note, if the game is telling you, if the game is implying like this doesn't matter because you just have a save file, then the players are going to eventually feel that way too. And if the players feel that way, then guess what? Nothing you do matters as a game anymore. The game can do anything, and the player's been put in the mindset that it doesn't matter because they can just quick save, quick load, whatever. It doesn't matter. So that's a problem. But it's the second problem. So you can see where I'm getting at. I don't like the Baldur's Gate gameplay structure, right? It's like these are just ancillary problems. They're not even actually directly related to the thing I'm talking about. So I'm going to put those aside and stay focused, which is very hard for me, but I'm going to try. And go back to this thing of Blah, right? So Blah casts Wish and kills you, and you reload. Now, a separate, I'm going to switch gears and talk about the Volo example again. In the Volo example, Volo is like, I can operate and get the thing out of your brain, and you're like, can you really? And he goes, yes. I'm paraphrasing. And you start this operation, and just like the Vlaakith example, there are moments where he's like, I'm going to cut your eye open. I gotta get it out. I can't get it. I don't remember exactly what happened. He was like, I can't get the thing. And you have dialogue options that are like, no, it's fine, stop now. And it just keeps implying that he has no idea what he's doing, like at all. And then there's a point where like your character can't speak anymore and your dialogue options are all gibberish. And then there's a point, I don't know if that happens before or after this, but there's a point where he pulls out an ice pick and he's like, I'm just gonna jam an ice pick in there. This is just a real thing that happens. And if you allow him to do that, he takes out your eye and then replaces it with Volo's eye. And Volo's eye gives your character permanent see invisibility. Okay? That's a really powerful ability in Baldur's Gate 3. There are a lot of annoying invisible creatures. They're very obnoxious if you don't have Volo's eye, because you have to deal to cast see invisibility or use it. But you can just get Volo's eye permanently for free by making the same idiot dialogue decisions. So do you see the problem? Okay. So I'm poking fun a little bit, but I want to be serious about what the problem is, right? I want to be clear and articulate the problem. The game, which needs to be telling me how I need to be interacting with it, right? Because it's giving me a lot of information. A game is giving you, its player, a lot of information at all times. But it needs me to understand the context in which I interpret that information. The game needs to understand that because I don't know that. The game has to give me that context. This is what onboarding and tutorialization is designed to do. A good tutorial gives you that context. It's not about teaching you the mechanics. You need those too, but good tutorials in video games are about giving you the context so that you can interpret the game's information effectively in the way that the game needs you to. So, with that in mind, what's the problem with these two examples placed side by side? One says, take the dialogue very seriously. Think about what the character is saying and what the implications of that are. The other one is, funny joke, here's an eye. So the game doesn't know, right? The game doesn't know how it wants you to interact with it. This is why I talked at the beginning about not giving players things that are momentarily fun or momentarily hilarious, even if they're really hilarious, that undermine the broader context of gameplay and story. Because now what? Now, like I said, I have a kind of a low threshold for this sort of thing. So when those two things happened, I'm pretty much done. Like, I'm checked out now because I'm like, the game doesn't even know what it wants. So it can't tell me what it wants. And if the game doesn't know what it wants and it can't tell me what it wants, then I don't know how to engage with the video game. I have to know how to engage with the video game. I have to. Oh, you can do whatever you want. No, that's a myth. That's not a real thing. We can talk about that another time, but it's not real. And it's not real because the video game still does have parameters and it will reward certain things more than other things, right? So that means that actually there are certain things that are better to do than others. So there's no such thing as you can do whatever you want. Okay. So that's a problem, right? And that's really, I think those examples are really indicative of Baldur's Gate 3 in general. There's a lot of focus on like, this was a funny moment, this was cool, this was fun, look at this cool thing that you can do, and you do all those things. You need to not run your games like this. You can get away with maybe a one-shot. If you want to run a game like this, run a one-shot and go nuts, because it doesn't matter. One-shots have much lower stakes with regard to like long-term player engagement and stuff like that, because they're one-shots. You one and done, right? So you can focus a lot more on like momentary, moment-to-moment, really funny stuff. But if you're running a game and you want engagement and you want the players to ever be able to take the story seriously, to ever be able to engage with the gameplay, you need to be able to say, to understand the consistent elements of those things. And the way to do this best is to understand how players are supposed to engage with their gameplay first, articulate that somehow, not to your players, just to yourself on a document maybe, and then understand how you can actually like communicate those points. But I understand most DMs don't want to go through that. That's like sort of professional design documentation stuff, so fine. But have some idea, right? Every time you go to make players do something, imagine what the implications of asking them to do that are in terms of what the gameplay is communicating, right? If you ask somebody to do a roll and there's a 0% chance they can succeed, what are you communicating to them? If you ask them to do a roll and they roll really, because if they roll really well on that and they fail, what you're communicating is sometimes your rolls don't matter at all. So make sure that if you're asking them to do a roll, that the rolls will matter. And sometimes you need to make low rolls matter too, because players will roll low a lot in a row sometimes. So you need to make sure that the roll itself has some kind of impact in some regard. What is a roll exactly? Because then you can make it so that rolls are kind of like rewards for something. That's the way I usually do rolls. If players come up with a solution to something, usually the roll is a reward, right? Not always, but often. And one thing that I'm very careful about is that a roll is never a punishment directly. There are rolls that do not result in progress, right? I want a roll to see if I understand this thing at all. You rolled a 2, no, you don't understand the thing at all. I usually try to give something, like if they're asking about something, I'll give them what I think they would know anyway. That way, the association of the information comes with the roll. But then when if they roll low, I'll also say there are these things that you can't discern, right? That way you have a clear idea of like, here's the things you know, here's the things you don't know, which also communicates here's the things you could have known if you rolled better, but didn't. And I keep it light like that because rolls, you can't iterate on rolls as a player, right? You can't do anything to make your rolls better, short of like character building stuff and long-term stuff. You can't roll the dice better, I mean. So that's another topic, but I want you to be thinking a lot about this. When you run a game, think a lot about like what the implications are in the context of other things that you're doing, and do not make the mistake that Baldur's Gate 3 makes. Do not. Baldur's Gate 3 is run by a pretty bad DM. Pretty bad. Do not take your cues as a DM from it. It's not a good idea. Be better. I know you can be better, because you watch these videos. I'm going to leave it at that with a big, smug smile. Okay, bye.